22nd January, 1944. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Tyrrhenian Sea as hundreds of vessels churned through dark waters toward the Italian coastline. Private James Whitmore gripped his rifle aboard the landing craft, watching the silhouettes of warships fade into the pre-dawn mist. Around him, soldiers from the United States 3rd Infantry Division sat in tense silence, their faces illuminated only by the occasional flash of naval gunfire streaking overhead toward the beaches of Anzio and Nettuno. This was Operation Shingle, a bold amphibious assault designed to outflank the formidable German winter line and perhaps change the entire trajectory of the Italian campaign. The plan had originated in the strategic minds of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and American commanders who sought to break the bloody stalemate at Monte Cassino. For months, Allied forces had battered themselves against German defenses stretching across the Italian peninsula, gaining ground measured in yards rather than miles. Churchill envisioned a cat claw thrust behind enemy lines that would force German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring to abandon his defensive positions and race northward to defend Rome. Major General John Lucas commanded the operation, though privately, he harbored deep reservations about the enterprise. His 6th Corps, consisting of approximately 40,000 British and American troops, would strike 30 miles behind German lines with insufficient reserves and unclear objectives. As the landing craft approached the shoreline, Whitmore could see the resort town of Anzio emerging from the gloom. Before the war, these beaches had hosted Italian families seeking summer pleasures. Now they would witness one of the war's most controversial operations. The first wave hit the sand at 2 o'clock in the morning, and to the soldiers' amazement, they encountered virtually no resistance. German forces, caught completely by surprise, had left the beaches lightly defended. Within hours, thousands of Allied troops poured ashore along a 15-mile front, establishing what military historians would later describe as one of the most successful surprise landings of the entire war. Sergeant Michael O'Brien of the British 1st Division watched supply trucks rolling off landing ships with mounting concern. The ease of the landing seemed almost supernatural, yet something felt wrong. Where were the German counterattacks? Why had they achieved such complete tactical surprise? Intelligence reports had indicated some German presence in the area, but nothing like the resistance they had expected. By nightfall on the 22nd, approximately 36,000 troops and 3,000 vehicles had landed with casualties numbering only 13 killed and 97 wounded. According to contemporary military analyses documented in various wartime records, this represented an almost miraculous achievement in amphibious warfare, but General Lucas faced an agonizing decision. Should he exploit this unexpected success by pushing immediately inland toward the Alban Hills, the high ground dominating the roads to Rome? Or should he consolidate his beachhead, build up supplies, and prepare for the inevitable German response? Lucas chose caution. His orders from overall Commander General Mark Clark had emphasized securing the beachhead above all else, and Lucas knew his force lacked the strength to capture Rome without reinforcements. As darkness fell on that first day, soldiers dug foxholes in Italian soil and awaited the morning. Unknown to them, their initial success would soon transform into months of grinding, desperate combat that would test every limit of human endurance. 24th January 1944. In his headquarters, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring absorbed reports of the Allied landing with characteristic composure. The 68-year-old commander, known to his men as Smiling Albert for his perpetual optimism, immediately grasped both the danger and the opportunity. The Allies had indeed achieved surprise, but their failure to push aggressively inland in those critical first hours would prove fatal. Kesselring issued orders with decisive speed that would demonstrate why Adolf Hitler considered him one of Germany's most capable defensive strategists. Within 48 hours of the landing, Kesselring had assembled an astonishing response. Drawing units from across Italy, France, Yugoslavia, and even Germany itself, he began constructing a ring of steel around the Allied beachhead. The 14th Army under General Eberhard von Mackensen received orders to contain and destroy the invasion force. Panzer divisions, parachute regiments, and infantry battalions began converging on Anzio from every direction. Lieutenant Hans Weber of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division remembered his unit receiving movement orders on the 23rd. They had been resting near Rome after hard fighting at Cassino, and now they raced southward on roads clogged with military traffic. The German response revealed the flexibility and efficiency of their military system, even at this late stage of the war. Kesselring stripped forces from quieter sectors, gambling that the Allies would not launch simultaneous offensives elsewhere. By the 26th, approximately 40,000 German troops had surrounded the beachhead, matching Allied numbers. Within a week, German strength would exceed 70,000 men. The speed of this concentration stunned Allied intelligence officers, who had predicted it would take weeks for the Germans to mount an effective response. General Lucas, meanwhile, continued building up his forces within the beachhead perimeter. His Ziga Corps now occupied a roughly 7-mile deep pocket along the coast, but he had not pushed toward the Alban Hills or severed the vital Highway 6 connecting Rome to the southern front. Critics, including Churchill, would later condemn this caution as a catastrophic failure of nerve. The Prime Minister famously complained that he had hoped to land a wildcat that would tear the German lines apart, but instead had gotten a stranded whale. Captain Richard Morrison of the United States Rangers observed German movements from forward positions near the town of Cisterna. Through his field glasses, he watched enemy forces digging in along the ridgelines, positioning artillery, and establishing observation posts. The Germans were transforming the surrounding countryside into a fortress. Morrison reported what he saw through proper channels, noting that the window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Every hour of delay allowed the Germans to strengthen positions that Allied forces would soon have to assault at tremendous cost. Historical records referenced in various military studies indicate that Hitler himself took personal interest in the Anzio situation, viewing it as an opportunity to inflict a devastating defeat on the Allies. He ordered Kesselring to drive the invaders back into the sea, willing to commit whatever resources necessary to achieve this goal. The Führer believed a victory at Anzio might delay or even prevent the long-anticipated invasion of France. By the end of January, the tactical situation had completely reversed. The Allies, who had achieved total surprise, now found themselves trapped in an increasingly constricted beachhead. The Germans held the high ground, controlled observation over the entire Allied position, and were preparing devastating counterattacks. Soldiers on both sides settled into their positions, unaware that the battle had only just begun. 30th of January 1944. General Lucas finally ordered offensive operations to expand the beachhead and seize the critical high ground. The main effort would target Cisterna and Campoleone, towns that controlled key road networks leading inland. If captured, these positions would provide jumping-off points for a drive toward the Alban Hills. But the delay had cost the Allies their advantage, and now they would attack against prepared German defenses with roughly equal numbers. Colonel William Darby commanded the elite 1st, 3rd, and 4th Ranger battalions tasked with infiltrating behind German lines to capture Cisterna. Darby, a 33-year-old officer from Arkansas, had trained his Rangers to operate with the speed and precision of a scalpel. His men had distinguished themselves in North Africa and Sicily, earning a reputation as among the finest light infantry in the American Army. For the Cisterna mission, Darby planned to infiltrate 2 Ranger battalions through a gap in German lines during the night, reaching the town at dawn before the enemy could react. On the night of the 29th, 767 Rangers began their approach march. They moved in single file through irrigation ditches and across open farmland, maintaining strict noise discipline. The cold January night offered excellent concealment, and initially the movement proceeded according to plan. But German intelligence had detected preparations for an attack, and patrols saturated the area around Cisterna. Around midnight, the lead elements made contact with German positions. Staff Sergeant Robert E. Halt led his squad through a vineyard when machine gun fire erupted from their flank. Germans had spotted the column and were calling in reinforcements. The Rangers had walked into a carefully prepared trap. By dawn on the 30th, both Ranger battalions found themselves surrounded in open terrain approximately 1 mile from Cisterna. German forces from the Hermann Göring Panzer Division and the Parachute Lair Battalion closed the ring while artillery and mortar fire pounded the trapped Americans. Colonel Darby, monitoring the situation from command posts to the rear, listened helplessly to increasingly desperate radio transmissions. His Rangers fought with characteristic ferocity, but they faced overwhelming numbers and had nowhere to retreat. Ammunition dwindled rapidly as German tanks joined the assault. Individual squads formed defensive positions in farmhouses and ditches, selling their lives expensively. Private First Class Carlo Contrera remembered the surreal quality of that morning. Surrounded, outnumbered, yet fighting with grim determination against impossible odds. Simultaneously, British forces attacked toward Campoleone along the Via Anziate, the main highway to Rome. The British 1st Division, supported by American armor, initially made progress against German positions held by the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division. Fierce fighting developed around the factory, a large agricultural complex that provided excellent defensive positions. Lieutenant Colonel William Murray led tanks of the 46th Royal Tank Regiment through German defenses, reaching to within 4 miles of the town. But coordinated German counterattacks, including Tigers from the 26th Panzer Division, eventually halted the British advance. By afternoon on the 30th, the Ranger disaster reached its conclusion. Surrounded, out of ammunition, and taking heavy casualties, the survivors had no choice but surrender. Of the 767 Rangers who began the infiltration, only 6 escaped back to Allied lines. Approximately 761 became casualties, with 130 killed and the remainder captured. The elite Ranger battalions had been effectively destroyed. News of their fate devastated morale throughout the beachhead and vindicated Lucas's earlier caution. The twin failures at Cisterna and Campoleone marked the end of Allied offensive operations for the immediate future. 3rd February 1944. Field Marshal Kesselring completed preparations for a massive counteroffensive designed to split the Allied beachhead and drive the invaders into the sea. Hitler had ordered the destruction of the Anzio landing, and Kesselring intended to comply. He assembled a powerful strike force including elements of 8 divisions, supported by heavy artillery and the Luftwaffe's remaining air strength in Italy. The attack would come down the Via Anziate directly toward the port, the jugular vein of Allied logistics. General von Mackensen's 14th Army would deliver the main blow. 3 divisions from the 1st Parachute Corps would spearhead the assault, supported by armor and self-propelled guns. The plan called for overwhelming the British and American defenders through sheer weight of numbers and firepower, punching through defensive lines before reserves could respond. German commanders studied aerial photographs and intelligence reports, identifying weak points in Allied positions. They noted particularly that American units holding the center of the line had arrived recently and lacked combat experience. Meanwhile, General Lucas worked desperately to strengthen beachhead defenses. The failure at Cisterna had demonstrated German strength, and intelligence indicated massive enemy buildup for a coming offensive. Lucas requested reinforcements from 5th Army headquarters, pleading for additional divisions to shore up his lines. General Mark Clark responded by sending the 45th Infantry Division and additional artillery battalions. But these reinforcements arrived piecemeal and had little time to prepare positions. Private Henry Martinez of the 45th Division remembered arriving at Anzio aboard a Liberty ship on the 1st of February. The harbor presented a scene of organized chaos. Supply dumps stacked everywhere, vehicles moving constantly, and the distant rumble of artillery fire rolling across the flat coastal plain. Martinez's company moved immediately to forward positions along the lateral road, the main defensive line running parallel to the coast. Officers briefed the men that German attack seemed imminent, possibly within days. 7th February 1944. At 5:30 in the morning, German artillery opened fire with devastating intensity. Hundreds of guns, mortars, and Nebelwerfers saturated Allied positions along a narrow front. The bombardment lasted 90 minutes, pulverizing foxholes and communication trenches. Then, at dawn, German infantry emerged from the morning mist in waves, advancing behind rolling barrages toward British positions defending the Aprilia salient. The initial assault struck the 1st Battalion of the London Irish Rifles with overwhelming force. German paratroopers from the 4th Parachute Division, among the Wehrmacht's finest infantry, crashed into British lines in savage close-quarters combat. Sergeant Thomas Wickham and his platoon held a forward strongpoint designated as the Embankment, a raised railroad line providing excellent fields of fire. They fought desperately as Germans infiltrated around their flanks, but by mid-morning the position had been overrun. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as German forces punched through first-line defenses. By evening on the 7th, German forces had advanced nearly a mile, capturing the ruined village of Aprilia and threatening to break through entirely. British units fell back in fighting withdrawal, establishing new defensive lines while artillery fire and counterattacks tried to slow the German advance. Casualties mounted alarmingly on both sides. Wounded men lay in the cold rain that had begun falling, waiting for medics who were themselves under constant fire. The next days brought continued German pressure as von Mackensen committed reserve divisions to expand the breakthrough. The 45th Division entered combat for the first time, with Green American troops facing veteran German paratroopers in brutal fighting. Staff Sergeant James Thompson watched his squad take position in a ravine designated on maps as the Gully. German artillery had the area ranged precisely, and incoming fire seemed never-ending. Thompson lost 3 men in the first hours, cut down by shell fragments as they tried to improve their foxholes. Allied commanders recognized the situation had become critical. If German forces reached the coast, they would cut the beachhead in half and destroy Allied logistics. General Lucas committed his reserves, including armor and the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, to contain the penetration. The battle hung in the balance as both sides poured men and material into an increasingly confined space. 16th February, 1944. The German offensive reached its crescendo with a massive armored assault down the Via Anziate, aimed directly at the heart of the beachhead. Von Mackensen had regrouped his forces after the initial attacks, and now he committed everything to one final crushing blow. The attack would employ 3 fresh divisions concentrated on a 2-mile front, seeking to overwhelm defenders through sheer mass and violence. At dawn, the largest German artillery barrage of the entire battle erupted. 452 guns fired on pre-designated targets, attempting to suppress Allied artillery before the assault began. Counter-battery fire had become crucial to both sides. American and British artillery observers worked frantically to identify German gun positions and call in counterfires. The mathematical precision of artillery science met the chaos of combat as ranging rounds searched for targets while both sides' infantry huddled in whatever shelter they could find. Captain Felix Sparks commanded a rifle company of the 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Division, holding positions directly in the path of the coming German assault. His men had been under constant pressure for days, taking casualties from artillery fire even when no ground attacks developed. Food arrived irregularly, resupply was dangerous, and the cold February rain made every foxhole a pool of freezing mud. Sparks moved among his positions, checking ammunition supplies and encouraging exhausted soldiers who had not slept more than an hour or 2 at a time in a week. At 6:30 in the morning, German infantry and armor attacked. Tiger and Panther tanks led the assault, their thick armor shrugging off hits from American anti-tank guns. Behind the armor came waves of infantry from the 114th Jaeger Division and the 715th Infantry Division. The German plan called for the tanks to overrun Allied forward positions, while infantry exploited the breakthrough. If successful, German forces would reach the coast by nightfall, cutting the beachhead in 2 and achieving Hitler's objective. The 45th Division sector erupted in combat of unparalleled intensity. German tanks ground forward through minefields and over defensive positions, crushing barbed wire and firing their cannons point-blank into Allied positions. American infantrymen engaged the armor with bazookas and rifle grenades, knowing that stopping the tanks meant survival for everyone in the beachhead. Private Robert Prout fired his bazooka at a Tiger tank from 50 yards, watching the round bounce harmlessly off the frontal armor. The tank's machine gun responded, killing Prout's loader and forcing him to take cover. Allied artillery proved decisive during this critical day. Naval gunfire from warships offshore, combined with massed field artillery firing from positions near the coast, laid down devastating barrages on German assembly areas and advancing columns. The concentration of Allied guns operating under centralized fire direction could bring down hundreds of shells on any threatened sector within minutes. German tanks advanced through storms of exploding steel that picked off supporting infantry and isolated the armor. By afternoon, German forces had penetrated approximately 1 mile into Allied lines, reaching a point just 3 miles from the coast. This represented the deepest penetration of the entire battle and created genuine crisis for Allied commanders. General Lucas committed his final reserves, including the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment under Colonel Reuben Tucker, to plug gaps in the line. The paratroopers moved forward through artillery fire, taking positions in the path of German advance. Tucker's orders were simple: hold at all costs. The evening of the 16th brought desperate close-quarters fighting as both sides fed reinforcements into the shrinking battle space. American and British troops fought from hastily prepared positions, often engaging Germans at distances measured in yards. Sergeant John Smith of the 179th Infantry Regiment remembered fighting in a drainage ditch alongside British tankers whose vehicles had been knocked out. They shared ammunition and held their position against repeated German assaults throughout the night, illuminated by flares and the flash of explosions. By midnight, German momentum had stalled. The combination of Allied artillery, determined infantry resistance, and mounting German casualties forced von Mackensen to pause and reassess. His divisions had suffered grievous losses for limited gains, and he lacked reserves to exploit even these modest successes. The crisis point had passed, though fighting would continue for days. 22nd February 1944. The German offensive ground to a halt after 2 weeks of relentless combat. Von Mackensen's forces had exhausted themselves against determined Allied resistance and overwhelming artillery superiority. The beachhead had contracted dangerously, now measuring only 7 miles deep and 16 miles wide, but it had not broken. Both sides transitioned to defensive positions as the battle entered a new phase characterized by artillery duels, patrol actions, and grinding attrition. General Lucas paid the price for the beachhead's near disaster. Despite having little responsibility for the operation's flawed conception, Lucas bore the blame for its problematic execution. On the 22nd, General Mark Clark relieved Lucas of command, replacing him with Major General Lucian Truscott. The change reflected broader dissatisfaction with the Anzio operation's progress and the need for a scapegoat. Truscott, a hard-driving cavalry officer with a reputation for aggressive leadership, took command of a beachhead that now more closely resembled the Western Front of 1914 than mobile warfare. The landscape around Anzio had been transformed into a moonscape of craters, destroyed vehicles, and abandoned equipment. Trees stood as blackened stumps, farmhouses reduced to piles of rubble. The odor of death hung over the battlefield as bodies from both sides lay unrecovered in no man's land between the opposing lines. Burial details worked under cover of darkness, but many dead remained where they fell, a grim testament to the battle's intensity. Life in the beachhead settled into a nightmarish routine. German artillery observers on the Alban Hills overlooked virtually every Allied position, directing precise fire on any movement they detected. The Allies nicknamed certain particularly troublesome German guns. Anzio Annie was actually a series of railroad-mounted 280mm guns that fired massive shells with terrifying accuracy. The Anzio Express referred to the sound of German shells passing overhead at regular intervals. Soldiers learned to identify different weapons by sound alone, calculating whether incoming fire required diving for cover or could be ignored. Corporal Donald Fraser served with a supply unit responsible for moving ammunition and rations to forward positions. This seemingly routine work proved extraordinarily dangerous at Anzio. German artillery interdicted roads, and the flat terrain offered little concealment. Fraser's truck convoys moved primarily at night, drivers navigating by memory and moonlight with headlights off. He lost numerous friends to artillery fire during these supply runs, men killed while performing unglamorous but essential duties. Medical personnel faced overwhelming challenges treating casualties under constant fire. The 95th Evacuation Hospital, established in buildings near the port, operated continuously throughout the battle. Nurses and doctors worked through artillery bombardments, sometimes treating wounded while shells exploded nearby. Lieutenant Mary Roberts, an Army nurse from Ohio, remembered the flood of casualties arriving during major attacks. We worked 36-hour shifts, performing triage, surgery, and post-operative care in conditions that would be unthinkable in peacetime. The boys were so brave, many terribly wounded yet concerned about their buddies still in the line. German forces endured similar conditions. Lieutenant Hans Weber of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division wrote in his diary about the strain of prolonged combat. His unit had been continuously engaged since the battle's beginning, taking heavy casualties from Allied artillery. Food arrived irregularly, ammunition was rationed carefully, and replacements consisted increasingly of older men or teenagers with minimal training. Weber noted declining morale as soldiers recognized their offensive had failed and that now they merely held positions under punishing bombardment. Both sides used the relative lull to strengthen defenses and plan future operations. Germans constructed deep bunkers and extensive trench systems, creating defensive positions that would require massive effort to overcome. Allies likewise improved their lines, laying additional minefields, stringing more barbed wire, and positioning anti-tank guns to cover likely avenues of approach. The beachhead was becoming a fortress, but one still under siege and dependent entirely on sea supply vulnerable to air attack and coastal guns. 15th March, 1944. Spring arrived slowly at Anzio, bringing warmer weather but no relief from combat. The battle had settled into grim routine, characterized by patrol actions, artillery exchanges, and occasional limited offensives by both sides. Soldiers on both sides adapted to conditions that tested every aspect of human endurance, developing coping mechanisms to survive not just enemy action, but also the psychological strain of prolonged combat. The cramped beachhead created unique problems for Allied forces. With German observers overlooking virtually every square yard, movement during daylight invited artillery fire. Soldiers learned to live underground, constructing elaborate dugouts and connecting trenches to provide covered movement. Some units dug shelters 15 feet deep, lined with salvaged timber and sandbags, creating subterranean worlds where men slept, ate, and tried to maintain sanity while earth shook from endless bombardment. Private Angelo Benedetto, serving with the 3rd Infantry Division, described life in these conditions in letters home. "We live like moles, emerging only at night. The days blend together. One can hardly remember what fresh air and sunlight feel like. The worst is the noise, the constant artillery that never stops. Some fellows have cracked under the strain, unable to take another day of shelling. Combat exhaustion, termed shell shock in previous wars and later known as post-traumatic stress disorder, afflicted soldiers on both sides in alarming numbers. Medical officers reported increasing cases of men unable to function due to psychological trauma. Captain William Barker, a battalion surgeon with the 45th Division, treated soldiers exhibiting symptoms ranging from uncontrollable trembling to complete catatonia. The Army's official response was harsh. Men diagnosed with combat exhaustion were treated and returned to duty as quickly as possible, as the beachhead's confined space left nowhere to send psychological casualties for extended recovery. German forces faced equally brutal conditions. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt served in the 362nd Infantry Division, holding positions north of the Via Anziate. He recorded in his diary the deteriorating situation, shortages of ammunition, reduced rations, and most critically, the realization that Germany was losing the war. Allied air superiority meant German supply convoys moved only at night and suffered constant harassment. Replacements arrived with inadequate training, sometimes boys of 16 or 17 thrown into combat with a few weeks of preparation. The battle's violence extended to civilians trapped in the combat zone. Several thousand Italian residents remained in towns and villages around Anzio, caught between the opposing armies. They sheltered in cellars and caves, emerging cautiously to search for food and water. Some provided intelligence to Allied forces, others to Germans, motivated by ideology, coercion, or simple survival instinct. Maria Antonelli, a 24-year-old teacher from Cisterna, survived the battle hiding in a wine cellar with her family. She witnessed her town destroyed house by house, street by street, reduced to complete ruins by artillery fire and airstrikes. The naval and air dimensions of the battle continued throughout this period. German aircraft, though vastly outnumbered by Allied air forces, launched periodic attacks on shipping in Anzio harbor. Luftwaffe pilots flew desperate missions, knowing most would not survive the war. Allied anti-aircraft defenses shot down numerous attackers, but some got through. On the 15th of March, a German bomber struck an ammunition ship, causing spectacular explosions that sent fragments raining across the port area. Allied naval forces maintained constant presence offshore, providing fire support and protecting supply convoys. Destroyers and cruisers operated within range of German coastal batteries, engaging in duels with shore-based artillery. The USS Mayo, a destroyer, took a direct hit on the 17th of March, killing 31 sailors and forcing the ship's withdrawal for repairs. Such incidents underscored the continued danger of operations in the restricted waters off Anzio. By late March, both sides recognized that breakthrough appeared unlikely for the foreseeable future. The Germans lacked strength for renewed offensive operations, having committed and lost their best available units. The Allies could not expand the beachhead without first breaking the Gustav Line farther south and relieving pressure on Anzio. The stalemate would continue until major operations elsewhere in Italy changed the strategic situation. 1st May, 1944. 3 months after the initial landing, the strategic situation in Italy finally began shifting. General Harold Alexander, commanding Allied forces in Italy, launched Operation Diadem, a massive offensive against the Gustav Line anchored on Monte Cassino. 13 divisions attacked along a 20-mile front, finally breaking the German defensive system that had held for months. This breakthrough created conditions for Allied forces at Anzio to attempt their own breakout and link up with advancing troops from the south. General Truscott planned Operation Buffalo, the Vicks Corps offensive to break out from the beachhead. His force had grown substantially since January, now numbering 7 divisions with over 100,000 men and substantial armor. The plan called for concentrated attacks in multiple directions, overwhelming German defenders through simultaneous pressure they could not contain. The main effort would drive northeast toward Cisterna and Cori, cutting Highway 7 and trapping German forces between Anzio and the southern front. 23rd May, 1944. At 5:30 in the morning, Allied artillery opened fire with devastating effect. Over 1,000 guns fired in carefully orchestrated barrages, the most intense artillery preparation of the Italian campaign. The bombardment lasted 40 minutes, systematically destroying German defensive positions, communication centers, and supply dumps. Forward observers adjusted fire based on aerial reconnaissance photographs and intelligence reports, creating a moving curtain of steel that preceded the infantry assault. Captain Charles Scheffel led his company of the 3rd Infantry Division forward through German minefields toward Cisterna. Engineers had cleared lanes through the obstacles during the night, marking safe passages with white tape. German artillery responded to the attack, but Allied counter-battery fire had suppressed many enemy guns. Scheffel's company reached its first objectives with surprisingly light casualties, overrunning German positions weakened by the preliminary bombardment. Behind them, tanks and tank destroyers moved forward to exploit success. The fighting around Cisterna proved intense as German forces rallied to defend the key road junction. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division counterattacked repeatedly, trying to seal penetrations in their lines. American tank destroyers engaged German armor in running battles across open farmland, neither side able to achieve decisive advantage. Sergeant Robert Jackson commanded an M10 tank destroyer that knocked out 3 German tanks during the day's fighting before taking a hit that killed 2 crewmen and disabled the vehicle. Further west, British forces attacked toward Campoleone, the objective that had eluded them in January. The 1st Division, reinforced with heavy armor, punched through German lines with methodical efficiency. After months of static warfare, soldiers relished the opportunity for mobile operations. Lieutenant Peter Blackwood led his platoon in pursuit of retreating Germans, capturing dozens of prisoners and overrunning several artillery positions before being ordered to consolidate. By the 25th of May, Allied forces had broken through German defensive lines across a wide front. Cisterna fell after savage fighting that left the town completely destroyed. German commanders recognized their positions had become untenable and began withdrawing northward, trying to establish new defensive lines before Allied armor could encircle them. The withdrawal, though conducted under pressure, demonstrated continued German military professionalism even in retreat. General Truscott faced a crucial decision as his forces broke out from the beachhead. His orders from General Clark directed him to drive north toward Valmontone to cut Highway 6, the main German supply route and line of retreat. This maneuver would trap significant German forces between Anzio and the advancing southern front. However, Clark also harbored ambitions to capture Rome, desiring American forces to liberate the Italian capital ahead of British units approaching from the south. Clark issued modified orders directing Truscott toward Rome, rather than maintaining focus on Highway 6. This decision sparked considerable controversy among military historians. Truscott complied with his orders, but believed the change in objectives allowed substantial German forces to escape encirclement. Field Marshal Kesselring used the breathing space to conduct a fighting withdrawal, saving divisions that would defend Gothic line positions north of Rome through the following winter. 4th June, 1944. American forces entered Rome, achieving Churchill's objective of capturing the Italian capital. But the victory came with asterisk. The Eternal City fell virtually without fighting, as Germans withdrew to avoid urban combat that would destroy historical landmarks. Liberation of Rome provided tremendous propaganda value for the Allies, but it did not destroy German forces in Italy, as Anzio's planners had originally envisioned. 8th June, 1944. The Battle of Anzio officially concluded as Allied forces linked up with troops advancing from the former Gustav Line positions. The campaign that began in January with high hopes and surprise landing had transformed into one of the war's bloodiest struggles. After 4 months of relentless combat, Allied forces counted their cost: approximately 29,000 American and 11,000 British Commonwealth casualties, including 7,000 dead. German losses were comparable, with approximately 27,000 casualties of all types. The strategic results of Operation Shingle sparked intense debate that continues among military historians today. Proponents argued the landing forced Germans to commit substantial reserves to contain the beachhead, weakening defenses elsewhere in Italy, and perhaps even delaying German ability to concentrate forces against the coming Normandy invasion. The operation tied down German divisions that might otherwise have reinforced the Atlantic Wall or the Eastern Front. Critics countered that Anzio accomplished little that could not have been achieved through operations less costly in lives and resources. The beachhead never seriously threatened German communications or forced withdrawal from the Gustav Line. Instead of a lightning thrust that unhinged enemy defenses, Anzio became a contained battle of attrition that absorbed Allied strength for months. Winston Churchill, the operation's primary champion, later expressed disappointment with results, believing Lucas's initial caution squandered the element of surprise. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Toffee, who served at Anzio with the 3rd Infantry Division, reflected on the experience in his diary. "We went in expecting a quick victory, a decisive stroke that would change the Italian campaign. Instead, we found ourselves trapped in a pocket, fighting for survival. The courage of the ordinary soldier, American, British, German, Italian, proved extraordinary. Men endured conditions that would break most people, yet they continued fighting day after day. The campaign's human dimension transcended strategic debates. Veterans carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. The intensity of combat at Anzio, particularly the constant artillery bombardment and confined space, created trauma that many struggled to overcome. Post-war veterans organizations documented high rates of what would later be recognized as PTSD among Anzio survivors. For Italian civilians, the battle brought catastrophic destruction. Towns like Cisterna and Aprilia were reduced to ruins, their populations scattered. Maria Antonelli, who survived the battle in her cellar, returned to find her hometown completely destroyed. Rebuilding would take years, and some communities never fully recovered their pre-war character. The campaign left physical scars on the Italian landscape visible decades later: bomb craters, abandoned fortifications, and military cemeteries containing thousands of graves. German survivors reflected on Anzio as exemplifying their army's defensive capabilities, even as overall strategic situation deteriorated. Despite being surprised, outnumbered in the campaign's later stages, and operating under Allied air supremacy, German forces had nearly driven the invaders back into the sea. Field Marshal Kesselring's masterful concentration of forces and von Mackensen's aggressive counteroffensives demonstrated continued Wehrmacht tactical excellence. But tactical victories could not overcome strategic realities. Germany was losing the war on multiple fronts. The Battle of Anzio teaches enduring lessons about amphibious operations, the importance of aggressive action when surprise is achieved, and the challenges of combined arms warfare. Modern military academies study the campaign as a case study in both operational planning and execution. The initial landing demonstrated excellence in logistics and surprise, while subsequent operations revealed dangers of unclear objectives and hesitant leadership. Today, the beaches of Anzio and Nettuno have returned to peaceful purposes. The Sicily-Rome American Cemetery contains 7,860 graves of American servicemen killed in the campaign. The Commonwealth War Cemetery at Anzio holds over 2,000 burials. These peaceful sites stand in stark contrast to the violence that once consumed this stretch of Italian coastline. Visitors walking these grounds can contemplate the price paid by a generation that fought against fascism and tyranny. Operation Shingle remains one of World War II's most controversial campaigns, a bold strategic gamble that achieved tactical surprise but failed to deliver decisive results. The courage of soldiers on all sides facing months of brutal combat deserves recognition regardless of strategic debates. From Private Whitmore landing on that cold January morning, to Lieutenant Colonel Toffee reflecting on the campaign's end, thousands of individuals experienced the terror, boredom, courage, and sacrifice that characterized this bloody chapter of the Italian campaign. Their stories, preserved in diaries, official records, and fading memories, ensure that the Battle of Anzio will not be forgotten.